We've got Jen, we've got Anne, we've got myself. I think
And Shannon,
we just
you have a
don't have,
quorum.
and Shannon. Okay, great.
You have a quorum.
So let's get started. First thing, order of business. I make a motion to approve the meeting minutes from the last ad hoc meeting.
So
Or
moved.
do I have a motion? Thank you, Anne. Second?
Second.
Great. Let's press forward. We've got 2 agenda items today, folks. We are going to hear from CEPOL as we gave them some homework, and they wonderfully did that homework and have brought some information about pathways forward or entry into the profession in a simplified way. And then we also have some data from 6 of our 16 board members for the thought exchange that was sent out a few weeks ago. So let's kick it off to CEPOL. If you can go ahead and share the presentation, that'd be great.
Yes, hi everyone. I feel like I haven't seen you guys for a while after seeing you a lot. It's nice to see everyone again. Okay, Tong's gonna share screen. Can you? Yes? Awesome. Teams is friends with Tong. Okay, so we're gonna get the presentation up there. So we did a couple of things. As Rebecca just mentioned, we did submit to you all kind of like a sort of simplified sort of mock-up of pathways into the profession. We're not going to present that today, but if you have questions, we can certainly go back to that. This is more about, last time we sort of spoke to you about coming back with more information about our research findings and analysis related to what the educator of the future looks like and what needs to change to realize that vision. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today and give some examples, both a conceptual framework for how to think about that, but also examples from out of state for you to consider. And one thing I just wanted to mention here is that when we talk about what we're talking about today in this presentation, many of the things will strike you as things that are not happening anywhere right now. The point is not to say that like no one's doing these things, but to kind of try to marshal all of this information into a way of thinking about how the profession and thus preparation needs to evolve now and into the future. So just clicking ahead, just to tell you about our methodology. So as part of our own research, which also draws on learnings from the CECC, we, in the past few months, interviewed a bunch of people, mostly in Connecticut, but also beyond. That includes people from school districts, district support organizations, EPPs, advocacy organizations, and other education leaders across the state. And what we asked them is basically to tell us what the educator of today and tomorrow should look like, what needs to change to realize that vision, and what is standing in the way of change. While we were conducting those interviews, we also conducted relevant academic literature review on the topic, and we looked to other states to try to uncover innovative and promising educator prep policies and practices that are aligned to the vision. We took all of that and we organized our findings into a conceptual framework that articulates the qualities we uncovered and also a vision for how ed prep needs to evolve in order to realize the vision. So based on all that, let's talk about where we landed with the vision. And this will probably feel resonant with many of you because you were part of the group of people we interviewed about this. So here it is, if you go down, what we heard and what emerged from all of that research is an educator needs to be someone who is a facilitator, a problem solver, a collaborator, and a leader. And I'm actually just gonna, in the interest of time, kind of move forward because we're gonna give you a little bit of information about each of these in the next few slides. So in terms of an educator as facilitator, we have excerpts on this slide and the ones that follow that kind of reveal to you some of the research and some of the things we heard in our conversations. We're not going to go over all of it, but just to highlight a few things for this one, something to note is that research suggests that teaching methods that individualize and adapt instructional conditions to learners' needs, abilities, and interests helps to improve learning achievement. And what is really key here is that an educator should perform the role of a guide or mentor, not just someone who delivers content to students. In terms of problem solving. The theme that surfaced from our research here is that educators are both capable and willing to solve the context-specific problems they face, and that in an increasingly uncertain and chaotic world, it's especially important that educators teach and model a growth mindset and effective problem-solving skills for their students. In terms of collaboration, there are many different ways the profession can be made more collaborative. Again, a lot of these things are happening, though, in uneven or kind of slow to take root ways. Everything from more common planning time to team-based PD to co-teaching models and to mentoring. There's just a lot of opportunity to leverage these types of structures to improve both educator satisfaction and also student outcomes. And then in terms of leadership, the question here really is how we can offer more leadership opportunities, not just in administrative roles, but also within classrooms. So educators do not have to leave the classroom in order to advance their careers. And this can have actually a dual purpose of also supporting the learning of teachers who are in training. We'll see an example of that when we share information from other states. The last slide here is just the old CECC slide, which we showed you last time. And again, as you see from the qualities that we just went over, they really do kind of closely mirror what the CECC came up with when it met. Okay, so begs the question. So let's talk about how we can realize the vision and then take a look at how other states have pursued various aspects of the vision. So clicking ahead. So just wanted to acknowledge at the start that this is largely focused on educator preparation, and that is in part because that's one of the sort of core responsibilities of this board. But we also wanted to acknowledge that while influencing ed prep is an essential component of the work ahead on its own, it would be insufficient to achieve the vision in its entirety. Other parts of the education system and profession, from recruitment to compensation to the way schooling is structured, would obviously potentially need to be addressed as well. But in terms of educator preparation, which again is one of the primary responsibilities of this board, really two things need to happen in order to move us toward the vision. And again, some of this might be happening already in pockets. So when we say prep needs to evolve, we mean more broadly across the system. The first is that the structure and content of educator preparation needs to evolve and become almost a continuum, spanning educator prep to employment in the classroom and even beyond. Ideally, there should be paid participation of candidates and co-teachers, mentors, school leaders in the training experience. Curriculum should be evidence-based and context-aligned. Again, that dual purpose teacher leadership structure I spoke of earlier, those which not only provide advancement opportunities for educators, but also serve to help train future educators, should be part of the structure. And then assessments should be increasingly competency-based to capture the types of complex skills that we were just talking about. The second point here involves monitoring and oversight of EPP program quality. And this is basically the lever the state and you all have to influence the first thing. So this is something you're already very familiar with. We are talking about program approval standards that are aligned to and encourage EPPs to develop if they are new, or to evolve if they are existing programs to better cultivate the skills needed for a future educator, rigorous and regular application of those standards, and then clear and transparent reporting of outcome data so we know how well programs are doing at preparing the educators we need. That, as we've spoken about this before in front of the CERT board, one of the key sort of missing components of your current data system is measures on completer effectiveness. And then use of that data for multiple purposes, not only to inform consumers, but to also provide policymakers and the state with information that can be used for program approval, but also for decisions related to how the state is investing its resources. Okay, So just to make this a little bit more concrete, I'm going to hand it off to Tong to give us examples from other states.
Thanks, Scheherazade. So we're just going to highlight here like a few sort of examples from other states that we think, whether it's their sort of educator preparation programs, policies, or practices, really are consonant with the vision, advances, towards the vision. Although obviously, to note, this vision is sort of something that we've crafted, and so it won't be like a one-to-one because these states, I guess, they don't co-sign that vision because this is our vision, but a lot of their kind of policies, I think, that we found actually are aligned with the vision. So the first is New Mexico's district partner teacher program. So this is an interesting program we uncovered. It was founded by legislation, so funded by legislation. The first thing to note is obviously, the residents there get paid sort of a decent stipend, and also the mentors and principals receive stipends as well, as a way of incentivizing their participation. And it's also strategic in terms of its funding, in the sense that for specific shortage areas where there's dire need for educators like special ed, actually a full teacher's salary is offered for the residents, not just a stipend. So paid participation is a feature that again kind of speaks to what Scheherazade was talking about just now, in terms of how ed prep pathways need to evolve. And it's also what we've heard from our research is something that is needed. Second, evidence-based and context-aligned curriculum. So the residents in New Mexico's district partner teacher program, they actually are taught to use not only the curriculum of the districts they will likely be placed in, but also even like their IT systems, their teacher eval processes they are made familiar with during their program, so that when they step foot into, it's almost as if like an advanced kind of induction program, if you will. They're learning about the school systems that they will eventually teach in, which is something that we don't always see for residency. So this is something we thought was interesting to note. And then the last is kind of what Scheherazade mentioned just now, the dual purpose teacher leadership structure. So co-teachers are selected through a rigorous application process in partnership with their school districts, in partnership with the partner school districts. And usually, there's some form of kind of selection based on how effective the teachers are. So it's an application process, you have to apply. And one of the criteria is you have to be effective, in terms of your effectively scored in terms of your evaluation, your yearly evaluations. And once selected, they are afforded this opportunity, obviously to lead and mentor, but really also to collaborate with the residents in the classroom. So it's a very collaborative, they perform like a, as a co-teacher, but also like a mentoring role, which is, I think important and kind of, achieves two goals here, leader and collaborator, if you recall the vision that we have. And then very quickly for the Tennessee teacher apprenticeship, it's, it is for all intents and purposes a standard apprenticeship, apart from the fact that it really emphasizes competency-based assessments. So they use portfolios, performance tasks, rather than kind of coursework, seat time requirements to advance their apprentices through the program. So now we turn to monitoring and oversight of EPP program quality. So the example we have here, there are two. One is Washington State's EPP program approval. So I know previously some of you, or rather the broader board, have kind of wondered what it would look like to have program standards that are very aligned to a particular vision that a particular state has. So Washington State's program approval process, I know it's sort of not CAPE, because I think that happened. We were talking about CAPE and kind of how can we leverage CAPE, but here is actually an example of how they really made sure that their program approval standards are very much aligned to what Washington State's own vision for its educators are, right? So you see there's an emphasis in the program standards of para-educator collaboration. They felt it's important. Teacher evaluation, teacher effectiveness research. So their programs there have to teach, or at least get their candidates familiar with teacher effectiveness research. They think that is important. They want every educator that they have to also be a researcher in their own right. So that's something that is baked into their program approval. And then lastly, tribal history culture, given Washington State's historical context, they thought that was important. So every EPP has to teach that. So again, something that's unique to the state. baked into the program standards. And the second is standards aligned program curriculum, standards aligned program design and implementation guidance. So Washington State has a bunch of guidance tools that they use, that they put out for EPPs to use, highlighting promising practices, examples of standards aligned program features and curriculum implementation and other strategies. So again, things for the field to consider, put out by Washington State's Professional Educator Standards Board. And the last point here is really about regular application of program standards. So PESB, which is their Professional Educator Standards Board, conducts 2 ongoing reviews of EPP programs, I believe every 5 years or sooner. And both of these review program sort of processes are really aimed at making sure that the standards are kind of, the standards are not just there. Obviously, as you know, implementation is a lot of times, what wins the battle. And so they really made sure that when they implement those standards, it's done in a timely manner, indicator-based, research-backed, and regular. So that's that. And then the last sort of point here is about monitoring and oversight of EPP program quality as well. Colorado, which you guys are all familiar with, we sort of mentioned in our memo and our previous presentations. But just to highlight again, when it comes to clear and transparent reporting of outcome data, Colorado really leverages its complete its educator eval system to determine completer effectiveness, and more importantly, to have that data and other data reflected in their data dashboard. And the way they use their program quality, so this is another important point, it's not just about collection of sort of valid, reliable data, but also how do you use them. And Colorado actually has a vision for how they use it. So it's explicitly stated that their annual reports, which comprise an executive summary and the data dashboard, so incorporates the data dashboard, is really designed to allow EPPs access to their data. So it encourages EPP to use that data to help with their continuous improvement efforts, but also enables the state, when they conduct their reauthorization, which is, the kind of periodic reviews, to quickly locate useful historical information. And then finally, just, to the public, right? Like it kind of helps to ensure that stakeholder groups, whatever they are, have access to the information needed for them to make timely and informed decisions. And so, putting at the forefront that it's not just about collection, it's also about how you use the data, how do you leverage the data, and who can get to use the data is something that I think Colorado did, that we think Colorado did quite well. So that's a bit about all the national examples we have. I'll hand it over to Scheherazade to take us through.
Right. Thanks, Tom. So just finally, before we stop talking at you, we just wanted to get really concrete and outline some of the work that the CERT board has before it that's very much connected to realizing the vision we've been talking about today. So we're just going to remind you of some of those upcoming obligations and dates before we close. So in terms of program approval, as you know, the current standards will be sunset next July. So there will be a vacuum on that day or the day after if no new standards are adopted before then. And then there's also an associated report due to the legislature around that same time. So working backwards, the immediate next steps would be to better understand Connecticut's current program approval framework, including the standards, to learn how other states approach it, and then to begin to develop and finalize a new set of standards and processes and guidance to implement it where necessary to submit to the state board to initiate the regulatory process. Given that we know that the regulatory process takes some time, it would be important to get that started well in advance of that July 1st deadline. And then in terms of reporting and use of outcome data, we recommend a similar approach. So first, learn how other states collect, publish, and use outcome data. Colorado is one example, but we can look for others. And then develop a preliminary set of completer effectiveness measures that, again, can be adopted statewide. This is really important because it's really critical if we want to monitor and improve EPP quality, but also there is existing Connecticut law that requires these types of measures. So really it's sort of overdue in Connecticut. You then want to kind of conduct an analysis to see how the current data infrastructure, not just EdSite itself, but also within school systems and EPPs, needs to evolve to be able to collect and publish those measures, and then have a final set of recommendations in advance of a July reporting obligation you have on workforce data to the legislature. Okay, so those are some of the key dates and activities ahead. We'll stop there and see, Rebecca and everyone, where you want to take things. If you have questions, you want to see something again, hear more, let us know.
I first just want to thank you for the thoughtful work and just simplifying the process and also providing a time-bound process for those two key areas. When we think about that time-bound process, and then I also think about entry into the profession and kind of some of the other slides that were shared, not in this direct presentation. To me, it feels like we need additional maybe ad hoc groups that are kind of working on each element. And so I'd be curious to hear from other members what your thoughts are, like kind of seeing the overall vision, and if we potentially want to come to our August meeting requesting additional groups. Jen?
So that was part of the work that we had just discussed before, was that we were going to be creating additional ad hocs at the August meeting. So that's already in the works for the board as part of our August agenda, both for our next statutory obligations and continuing the work of our other statutory obligations that we've already done, including the regs that are under this timeline that we have here. So much so that we've been working with SDE and identifying not only the regs, but starting to identify a timeline and addressing each one of the regs that we've done so far. So that'll be part of the work starting for the board in August. I did have a question though, based on this, I think maybe for our guests here from SDE. We heard quite a few things, including like the EdSite for dashboard, which we did a review of, and we had Ajit come to and prepare a report with some kind of areas that still need tweaking for sure, and some explanation as to why some of that work hasn't been put forward yet. I'm wondering from SDE, based on what you just saw, are there things within this report that we are currently doing that maybe we're just not privy to as a board yet, that you might be able to provide any insight to?
Well, I think some of what CEPOL's putting forward is a new vision and new standard, sort of from the framework of what are you envisioning a Connecticut educator to be, and sort of thinking through those various components and ostensibly creating Connecticut specific standards around that. So I think the bulk of what they presented is not happening because it hasn't, relative to what EdSite currently has. The educator preparation dashboard has a lot of information. It does not have the completer effectiveness component. So if that is going to be a big part of it, then you'll certainly want to loop in Ajit and folks from the performance office in terms of what is the feasibility of that and what does that really look like? Because I think in those states that look at completer effectiveness, you have to remember too, it only becomes narrowly constrained to tested subjects. So, you're looking at sort of ELA and math test scores. By and large, how other states do it is sort of like ELA and math test scores connected to the educator. And there's many other certification areas and bodies of knowledge beyond just tested subjects in K-12. So I think that component of completer effectiveness piece will require a great deal of thinking, with the cert board and what sort of the vision is for that. But I think you'll want to loop in the performance office relative to those conversations, to see, feasibility and all of the complexity. I can't speak to the sort of why that component hasn't existed in the past, but I know there's sort of like union complexity, and there's just a million things that I don't know enough about to be able to speak to, but certainly the performance office, that is, I think, who you'd want to engage with relative to that work. And maybe CPRO, may want to set up a conversation like this, with him, just in terms of the millions of layers, and bodies involved relative to that. Kaylin or Julianne, am I forgetting anything? Or Karen?
So could we go ahead and ask CPRL to have that conversation with Ajit, kind of like when they worked with ECE on that birth to grade 3 certification, kind of getting some information or sharing how, was it Colorado? Is that what I'm remembering, that they're kind of using teacher evaluation data to assist with that?
Liz, go ahead.
I'm always so bad with Teams and I can't tell if I'm raising my hand or not, but we're happy to talk to Ajit. I will also just say, as a point of clarification, other states are going beyond tested subjects and are not relying on just standardized assessments, but are thinking about there are different examples. We selected one, just it's not that long of a meeting today, but yes, they're thinking about different ways of understanding more holistically measures of completer effectiveness that can be sufficiently, what I will say is, sort of applied across the state, but that aren't constrained to sort of like, the 3 to 8 state proficiency exams and things like that, and go sort of across the board, leveraging school assessments that happen in schools, and a variety of things, other sort of employer satisfaction surveys, and so it sort of runs the gamut, and we'd be happy to talk to Ajit if that's the next step. I also think there's probably a discussion to be had amongst you all, and we can help provide research on more state examples and things like that, to support those discussions too.
Yeah, I also want to be mindful of there's there's a lot here, and there's so many different directions. So Jen, I'm glad that we're like hearing that there's going to be other ad hoc groups that are going to be doing something like that are going to be lending some thoughtfulness to this discussion, which makes me think about our role, and like my hope for this group is actually really focusing in on entry points. So like I love that we have a clear vision, and I think we need to bring this to the larger board around, hey, we said facilitator, problem solver, collaborator, leader. This is what the community is saying. This is what's been coming out after years of having this conversation in Connecticut. And so with that, for our group, like what does that mean? Like, what do we need to have a more streamlined entry process into the profession, which is only one element of a larger conversation. But I'm curious about other members' thoughts about focusing this ad hoc into the entry into the profession and streamlining that.
So to clarify, you're thinking more along the programming and the EPP. Is that what I'm understanding, Rebecca?
So I'm thinking along the lines of like when not just the EPP, it's if we were to solely design a streamlined and inclusive and adaptive entry process into the profession for maybe what we would say a traditional kind of undergraduate pathway, an alternative pathway, career changers, like what is that streamlined, inclusive, and an adaptive entry process versus us designing for the retention pathway, or us defining what is what an the EPP process is. That's its own kind of bucket right there. I'm looking specifically at entry.
Okay. Can I get some clarification on this report? Because we did put out a thought exchange on 3 kind of key questions that our group had kind of come up with and refined. Based on my understanding, and just correct me if I'm wrong here, this vision that CPRL presented here is based off of some research, and then it sounded like some interviews of specific people within the board. Is that correct?
We have been doing interviews, actually over this leverages interviews that we've been doing in Connecticut for the past few years, but they span within folks working within districts, both teachers and administrators at the school and district level, a number of those who see themselves as members of the EPP community around the state, those who see themselves as part of the broader educator workforce infrastructure. And there have been people who are on the board who have been interviewed over the course of our research in Connecticut, though we didn't it's not research based on the board. But Jen, if you want us to interview everyone on the board, we can definitely do that. It's just the data set comprises lots and lots more people.
I was just trying to get an understanding of kind of where this was, because this wasn't necessarily, I mean, it's a good vision, but this isn't the vision that this particular vision group came up with that we have kind of approved. This kind of a vision that you guys have put together based on those interviews and the different research, right? Just to be clear. So to propose this to the board, we would have to agree that this is what we want our vision to be, or we would have to amend or adjust this vision before we would propose it to the board.
I mean, would we? I mean, why couldn't we propose, like, based on the data that's been collected over the past years throughout multiple communities in Connecticut? Could we not have people present at the board meeting and say, this is what our community, this is what has been said? Does this align with what we would want, and have that conversation? Or are you saying that we would need to have that conversation here? I wouldn't change anything based on that. I don't think if like based on what's presented here, I think the 4 pillars, facilitator, problem solver, collaborator, and leader, is a vision of an educator today and tomorrow. And I hope that this kind of vision ad hoc group really focuses in and what is the streamlining of the entry points into the profession.
Right, and all of our ad hoc committees have been set up so that we kind of do the work in terms of what it is that we would like to see, and then we move it forward to the board. So we vote on what it is that we want to move forward to the board, and then present it to the board and allow them to give, and we provide them with the information on why we kind of chose these things, or why we might have amended or adjusted something prior to. That's the way all the ad hocs have been working, where we vote to move things forward to the board. So it would, as part of this meeting or a future meeting, it would require like conversations on going into detail over the items. And if we agree or think that it should be adjusted in some way, there would need to be a motion to move the report to the board and request to have this be put on our agenda for the August or September meeting to present to the board.
Great. I would make a motion to present this vision to an educator to our board in August, and we can open it up for discussion.
So you as the chair get to govern over and request to entertain a motion for that.
Okay, I would entertain it.
Yeah.
I'll make a motion to bring the report to the August meeting, you're saying, Rebecca? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I have some questions, but I'll save it for the discussion.
Okay.
Okay.
Jen, what the Robert's rules
You
say
would-
next?
You would need a second.
And I cannot second.
No.
Through you, Madam Chair, just ask for a second. Is there a second?
Is there a second? And seconds. Let's open it up for discussion. You can tell my
Perfect.
excitement about Robert rules. What are members' thoughts about any adjustments that they would make to this vision or questions?
I can go. I mean, I guess I'm curious to see how to bring the two things together, how we bring the CPRL research together with the thought exchange, because I thought there were some really interesting things that came out in the thought exchange. So if there's a way to sew those together as a presentation to the full board. I also kind of am trying to grapple with what the role of this visioning group is going forward, because I see tactical ad hoc groups to meet the different deadlines, like what we've had, which is very much meeting specific compliance oriented deadlines. But this was the group I thought that was going to kind of pull up and look more at the 10,000 foot level on what's possible. Like, we've got the things we have to do, but then how do we dream the dream of what could be possible and get ahead of, once we meet all those compliance areas, how do we pull up and say, what else could we be doing? Or did we do the right things, and are they coming together cohesively? Because we could go back and refine and revise as we go, because this is a standing board. I think there's a chance to keep iterating. But I think what I'm excited about with this group, if it stays and endures, is to talk about the things that don't come up in the statute, like the idea around like the model in New Mexico, the idea about different residency models, pay, compensation changes, things like that, career changer opportunities. I think there's a whole universe that this group could be thinking about to relieve the rest of the board to do the things that we have to do also simultaneously, if that makes sense.
Jen?
I agree with Shannon. I'd like that vision idea, and I think we had spoken before that might help guide a lot of our ad hocs if we have an overarching vision for the group. The other thing that I was kind of going to ask, I really like the idea of maybe asking people to take a look at that thought exchange document and what was kind of proposed there, and seeing how we can kind of merge the two, like Shannon had said. Additionally, in terms of research, when we're looking at rankings of states for public school education, I kind of get concerned when we're looking at the lower 50% of states when we're looking at different options. So, things like, I love New Mexico, and I actually sat on a webinar some time ago with the Department of Education, where they talked about their program where they pay student teachers of their residency, which sounded great. But when we're looking at, Connecticut typically ranks in the top 10 in the nation, and we're looking at some of these states for research where they're ranking anywhere from 35th to 31st, in some cases 42nd to 49th in the nation. I just worry about, are we looking at people that are at the cusp of innovation and student outcomes when we're thinking about those student outcomes that we were discussing earlier in terms of teacher effectiveness or educator effectiveness. So I'm just wondering if we could have some maybe research or data in like the top 10 to 20 states in terms of public education.
That's a pretty broad, like the top 10, like where a state ranks in terms of public education. Then pick a metric, because when we talk about like Black and Hispanic students in the state of Connecticut or in certain areas, we actually rank extremely low when it comes to reading and math versus overall. So I'm curious to, like, on what ranking would you, are we thinking like teacher effectiveness, like ranked by state? Are we thinking about
I believe that when they do the rankings, they kind of pull in all of that information into the rankings. They're looking at funding. They're
what
looking at,
rankings in particular are you thinking?
there's the national ranking of states for public education. Each year they come out with a new ranking. I think it was 2025, which just came out in June or July. I'm just wondering if we could also just look at some, states that we also have like, reciprocity with, to ensure that too, because we do have certification reciprocity with as well. And that we're looking at states where student outcomes historically are on the higher side. And if you're looking at, like, so Rebecca, if we're looking at students of color, maybe that's one of the lenses that we look at as well. Like, what states have outcomes or outstanding outcomes or whatever our metric might be. And then what are they doing for preparation as well as certification in those states? it's just an additional lens that I'm kind of thinking of when I'm looking at things like this. So
I think I apologize. My hand raise isn't working, so if you don't want me to speak, it's okay.
I didn't see it. I'm so sorry. Please speak. Please speak.
No, it's not working. That's it, my computer. I don't know why, but thank you, Rebecca. I think one of the splits that I'm feeling here is that this group, which I was excited about, the vision to me is critical in the moving forward, even with the regulatory assignment that we have, because it's the best that I can come up with. If I don't have this context of vision, I feel like I'm trying to do a jigsaw puzzle without the cover of the box. Does that make sense? Like, I need the cover of the box. I need to know where we're going because none of the other stuff makes sense to me otherwise. And I don't see it as dualistic. I don't see it as an either or. I simply see this as contextualizing the work, which I think is really, really critical. And out of that, we can, like, this needs to be foundational to where we're moving, even with the regulatory stuff. And I feel like our next step is really, if we're going to develop ad hoc committees, not so much to be tied to one side of the fulcrum or the other, one side being sort of, we're under the gun to do these sort of regulatory things and we have deadlines, and or we can, I don't see it as an and or, that's all. So keeping this vision of facilitator, problem solver, collaborator, leader, how do we do that for entry? How do we do that for curriculum? How do we do that for residency structure? How do we do that for outcomes? To me, those are the four things, the four areas that we need now to be able to do ad hoc work in. There's an entry piece. You're right, Rebecca, but there's also a curriculum piece for the EPPs. What is that going to mean? For example, we do nothing, I'll admit this, with paraeducators or working as a collaborator in teacher prep. We need to do that. That should be in there. And then the structure itself in terms of the relationship with the school, the residency structure, the mentor-teacher structure. What are we going to do with that? I think there should be regulations around that, not just who wants to be a mentor, but really have some requirements around that if we mean it. And then outcomes, what do we mean by that? Not just test scores. Those are all really big things, but I think I need the framework.
I agree. I'm sorry, I didn't raise my hand. Sorry, because my battery is about to die, so I'm probably gonna have to jump off the call. I agree with Anne. Maybe the work isn't presenting this in August per se. Maybe the work is refining this to what Shannon and Anne are saying for September, in which we are looking at or presenting the vision component of it, like that facilitator, problem solver, collaborator, leader, and then kind of working out those other components of that overarching that Anne was just talking about and how that plays out. As opposed to the, I think it's section 3 to 4, because 3 to 4 is like very specific, which might be more to the ad hoc work that we have moving forward. So I think like maybe page 1 through 10 of this is what can possibly kind of get presented as part of your update, Rebecca, for August. But maybe the update includes like the continuing work is kind of refining on what that would look like based on like what Anne said, and that we're cross-referencing it to the thought exchange information that we'll be sharing with the board as well. Those are just my thoughts.
I appreciate, Jen, how much there's like rules of order around this, but I worry that it gets clunky and slow. And that's not you. I'm just saying in general, how do we move things given the timeline. Not to be unthoughtful, but simply I just feel like I'm very naive about legislation and everything else. It's just really slow. And I don't know how to help streamline that aspect of it. But
It's
it
certainly
feels
tricky,
clunky.
and even when I'm looking at the work ahead and we're thinking about regulations, I think the timeline on here is too far away, because in order for us to get this legislation in for the next, or the regulations updated for the next one, we would really not wait until June 2026. We would have to have that into the state like this winter, this fall. In terms of like all the sunsetting ones. So even like this timeline, I'm not sure that I would present this timeline currently, because there's parts of it that I think need to be tweaked based on kind of the work that we'll be doing in ad hoc and what we know the requirements are to submitting to State Board of Education, which is why my recommendation, and I don't know, Karen, would this be a motion that I would have to make or an amendment to Rebecca's motion? Because the original one was to submit this, or not Rebecca's, I forgot who motioned it, to submit the entire report. I would make a motion to amend the original motion to submit as part of Rebecca's update to the board, with people there to kind of field any questions, everything through page, I think it was page 10 of this slide deck, and then allow April and Rebecca to kind of work on merging the thought exchange information into it, and then maybe even bring Anne into the works on kind of like defining those entry points that would be more overarching. That was a very large amendment. So let me say that again. I make a motion to amend the original motion to submit to the board pages 1 through 10 of this presentation, with an update to the board that additional work is being done that will be presented in September.
Is there a second?
I second. I think just wanting to clarify what would happen with this group between that planning for the full board meeting and September, so we don't lose time.
So what we have to do is we'd have to vote on the amendment and then vote on the overall motion, and then we can talk about timelines is what would typically happen.
So I seconded. So do we have to vote?
Unless we vote. So all in agreement?
Go ahead and click the raised hand button, what might make it easier for
Anne doesn't
Karen
have.
to record.
Anne,
Anne,
And
raise
you
your
don't
hand.
have,
I'm sorry, I'll have to do it visually. I'm sorry.
okay, and I think, did you do it visually? Sorry, no, okay.
So Karen, do you have the vote?
Entirely. I have 3 hands raised, Anne, Shannon, and you, Jen, but I don't have any others. Is that
I
it,
didn't raise
Jen?
my
No,
hand.
Anne didn't raise her hand.
I
So you're not in
didn't. I'm
agreement. Okay.
against the motion.
Okay.
Can we get a clear, like what Anne would, like how you would modify it?
Yeah, do you have a modification?
I was for the original motion, so no.
How many people
So
do we have here?
you
There's only
have
4 of us, right?
4.
Is Cynthia here? Yeah, there's 4 of us.
So there's
So
2
2 are
for,
for the original.
2
2
are
are for
for
the
the
original.
amendment. Yep.
So there's 5 of us total on this board, but only 4 of us are here.
Yeah,
Okay.
but,
We're
and we
looking
never
at-
took a vote on the original amendment.
yeah, we didn't vote on the original one.
Because we were voting on an amendment to the original
Oh,
one.
yeah, so the
So
amendment
this
did
was
not
a vote
pass.
to amend. Okay.
I'm just trying to get clarity on what the major difference is between the two. Can we just have a
To
conversation?
me, my understanding is that by submitting the entire presentation, like I want the board to be able to, I want to hear the reactions. I think that's important for us as a visionary team, like ADOT, to be able to hear their reactions to the entire thing so that we can then come back and have that discussion about what that means for the work moving ahead. And so I would present the entire presentation, be like,
Gotcha.
let's keep it moving. And does that resonate with you?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Yes,
I didn't.
Rebecca.
I misunderstood the amendment then. So I thought it was just more focused
So
on the process than.
No, the amendment
Right,
was
the
to just share the first 10
First 10.
slides.
tentatively, so we would share the first 10 slides for the board while Rebecca and April worked on aligning the thought exchange information to this particular one to kind of reflect the voices that were in the thought exchange, and then
Yeah.
present the other components of it.
Liz,
So
do you have something? Liz has her hand up.
I did have my hand up just because I wanted to offer a couple points of clarification, and anyone can tell me at some point if I'm not allowed to say what I'm about to say. But
One moment, please. Through you, Madam Chair, there's a motion on the floor and an amendment. So that either
right,
has to
the
be
motion, the motion did not pass because it was 2 to,
Two.
it was 2 to 2. So that did not
And I
pass.
want to remove my second because I didn't understand the amendment fully. So.
Oh,
can
but we also, are we still in discussion for the original amendment? Yeah, we're still in discussion for the original amendment put forth by Shannon, seconded by Anne. And Liz, you want to share insight in this conversation?
All I was going to say is that there are some points that I think we we agree to or could change. So one, we do agree, as you'll see on the screen, that the regulatory process would have to start well in advance of June. We were suggesting the winter, but if I couldn't tell if it was suggested that should be brought up even before, like we could move that up. But I do think it's really important to highlight that we're not suggesting that it would start basically at the time of the sunsetting. And the other point of clarification that I was going to offer is that one, we can bring forward additional research on other states. We have research on other states, but we're trying to be mindful of time. And two, some of these, like the New Mexico example in particular, is attached to a program. It's not attached to the state as a whole. So I think that's also an important distinction in terms of looking at efficacy of the types of things that we're bringing forward. And then third, is that I don't think we have access to the thought exchange data, but if you do want help in analyzing that or in folding it into, we are happy to do that in addition to pulling in work from other states or other things that might be helpful in advance of the next meeting.
Yeah, so what I can commit to, which aligns with what you were saying, Jen, in the amendment of it, is in working with CEPRL to bring in the thought exchange data from the 6 participants of the board into this work, and then sending to this ad hoc vision committee like an updated version of this, in keeping with the 4 pillars of the vision, but just like including kind of those additional details. So that it can be presented at the August meeting for the amendment that is currently, or not amendment, a motion that is currently on the screen.
So why don't we vote on the
Great.
motion, and then we can talk about what details you want included in there or how you want it amended, if that makes sense.
All right, that sounds good. So all in favor of Shannon's motion? It's 3 all opposed. And abstaining. All right, and Jen abstains. So that passes. we will move forward with that. So let's talk about quickly the logistics. I know that we are over time and the phones are about to die. So um, uh, as I mentioned, I can work with CPRL over the next week or two, and then send out via email an updated version. I don't think we're going to have time to collectively come together again. Does that work for folks?
That's fine.
Yeah, but let's just quickly talk about what we want kind of in there. So we want the thought exchange to be merged in, so we can ask Karen to share that document with you. Additionally, I think Connecticut has some programs where students get a stipend of some kind, maybe pulling that information on how it's like where it's happening and how it's happening. So that might be an SDE kind of conversation to happen, because they might be privy to which EPPs provide that for their candidates and
Do you
how
mean
well
like
it's working.
The apprenticeship
so
does
like
that.
apprenticeship program?
Yeah,
Yes, yes.
Okay,
that's very
yes. I
new.
mean, yeah, we have the apprenticeship program, and then there's the scholarship money for like residencies and things of that nature.
Right,
But
exactly.
that's like what. So you let me understand this right. Just like they've presented for other states, are you asking what does Connecticut do
Connecticut
that's
do.
aligned to that?
I'm asking what EPPs might be doing that's aligned to that already. So maybe we can pull from some, because not all EPPs are doing that, not all residencies are doing that. So maybe pulling that information to seeing what are we already doing, and how might we highlight that statewide, right? As well as like
But
some of the
that's
things that we
more.
do.
Yeah, I'm. That's like that's an S. Shannon, go ahead.
SDE.
I was
Yeah, that's an
going to say, I
SDE.
think that that is a good point, that I'm looking at the thought exchange. There are examples of ways that Connecticut is addressing some of the ideas in there. So I don't know if this is a little more ambitious, but if there's like a crosswalk between what has been recommended or proposed in the thought exchange with the current state of what might already be happening in Connecticut, or even just illustrative examples. But I don't think we have collectively as a board an understanding of all the things, even if they're in a pilot phase, might already be happening, and
That's
how
true.
do we build on those things? So that might
Yes, CPRO, you have that data. I've seen the charts that show like here's what Connecticut has going on in comparison to some other states, like apprenticeship or residency or things of that nature.
or career
And then,
changer access,
Yeah.
to the
Okay.
profession, 098, 090 kind of thing. Yeah.
Okay.
and then
We could
I would
do
say
that
that
and
this,
also check with Julianne. I saw your chat, so maybe Julianne and Lauren, we can meet and go over it together. Or
and then I would
anyone
say,
else from the state.
Yeah, we
I
have
would say that
colleagues that
our
are sort of overseeing the apprenticeship program, so they'd be good to loop in.
Okay.
that would be great. And then I would say that our timeline, I would probably put in there like a draft timeline, because I think that some of this does need to be tweaked based on the ad hocs that we're going to be creating and the work that they're going to be doing and the timelines that we're going to be giving them. So I would probably say like your proposed action keys for program approval standards, the proposed timeline might need to be adjusted, or might even need to like add rows into it of the different things that have to be done, if that makes sense, which I'm happy to meet with you guys on. I just don't think I don't think that part will be finalized for the August meeting, which is why I'm saying put in draft there, so that they understand there's additional things that we have to put in and get understanding of like the regulatory process and the SDE process to ensure that we get all that in.
I don't have the ability to raise my hand, but I just want to raise my hand. Just this, this timeline is all relative to the program approval standards, and it looks ambitious just for that little bucket. I just want to put out there to this group, it's important to remember when you're thinking about timeline relative to the program approval standards, there's still about 100 other regulations with a sunset date of July 1. So I don't know if that's a separate chart or a separate presentation, but just when you're thinking about timeline, just remember this whole robust plan is for just like the little clump of program approval standards and regulations, and doesn't even touch upon the, maybe 100 plus regulations sunsetting July 1. So not to further complicate
And we
things,
are,
but just
No.
and just so the vision ad hoc understands that we are working with SDE and coming up with a timeline to address all of those regulations that are sunsetting so that we can start working on them each meeting to ensure that we get those all in a timely fashion through the board.
And when you say we, that's you and
Who's that?
Karen.
So that's I'm working with Karen and SDE to just kind of look at them and see like which ones do we have to get in during our because we have to work with SDE on when we submit for the regulatory process. So we want to make sure that we're getting them all in a timely fashion with the board to address. So we're just kind of identifying which months to kind of get each portion in so that we can get that done.
Yeah, I was just checking on who, like, what we represented. So you and Karen, you with SDSC, looking that out to draft. I got it.
Right. So that I can put it
All
on
right.
the agendas since I have to set the agendas. I want to make sure they're on the corresponding agendas for the future.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate everybody. I know we are like well over time. And so I'm going to entertain a motion to end this meeting, whatever the words are, end the meeting. And then we can move to the next meeting. Second.
Second.
All right, thank you, and more
Thanks.
to come. And SDME folks, if we can just stay here, because I was supposed to meet with you anyway. Let's, that'd be great.
Thank
Thanks
you.
all.
Thank you.
Bye.
So Karen, would they have to sign into the other meeting to stop the recording of this one or?
I have to
Can you
end
just-
this one. I have to end this
Yes.
recording. Okay.
Okay,
And then
can
just
you
log in.
resend me the link?
Yeah, sure. I'll send it to you.
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I didn't hear
We're
you.
hopping into the original 11:30 one. Is that
Yes.
just I'm
yes,
clicking on the right thing? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right.
See you
Okay.
there.
All right. See you on the other side. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.